There is a specific rule we have about the deep woods that isn't written in the handbook, which is that if you hear a woman screaming for help after midnight in a sector that hasn't had a check-in for days, you don't just run in blindly, you lock your doors and you prepare for a fight. That might sound cold to people who don't work out here in the dark, but in my line of work, usually the things that sound the most innocent are the things that want to hurt you the most. My name is Elias, and I've been a ranger in the Northern Cascades for just over 6 years, covering a territory that consists of roughly 40,000 acres of dense pine, jagged rock, and absolute isolation. Most nights are quiet, consisting of nothing more than chasing teenagers away from the reservoir or telling campers to put out their fires properly. But last Tuesday was different because the weather had turned violent and the radio chatter had gone completely dead. I was sitting in my patrol truck, a heavy-duty pickup that smells permanently of stale coffee and wet dog fur, parked on a ridge overlooking Sector 4 known as Dead Man's Drop. The rain was hammering against the roof of the truck with such intensity that it felt like I was inside a drum, and the wind was shaking the heavy frame of the vehicle every few seconds. I was just about to put the truck in gear and head back to the station to wait out the storm when the radio crackled to life with a sound that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It wasn't the dispatch center and it wasn't another ranger. It was a static-filled transmission that sounded like it was coming from a handheld walkie-talkie with a dying battery. The voice was high-pitched, frantic, and barely cutting through the white noise of the storm. "Please, someone. Leg is broken. Near the old mine. Please help." I grabbed my mic immediately, my heart jumping into my throat because the old mine was miles away from the main road and incredibly dangerous even in perfect weather. I keyed the mic and responded, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. "This is Ranger Unit 4 Alpha. I copy your distress call. Identify yourself and give me your location." There was no response, just the hiss of static and the relentless drumming of the rain on the windshield. I waited 10 seconds, then 20, and just as I was about to call dispatch to relay the information, the voice came back. "Please, someone. Leg is broken. Near the old mine. Please help." I froze, my hand hovering over the gear shift, because there was something incredibly wrong about what I had just heard. The inflection, the tone, the pause between the words, it was identical to the first time, not just similar, but an exact duplicate. I've heard panicked people on the radio before, and they never say the same thing twice in the exact same way because fear makes you stutter and change your wording. I keyed the mic again, feeling a cold knot of suspicion tightening in my stomach. "Ma'am, this is Ranger Unit 4 Alpha. Can you hear me? I need you to tell me your name." The radio remained silent for a long moment, and then, exactly 30 seconds after the last transmission, it happened again. "Please, someone. Leg is broken. Near the old mine. Please help." It was a recording. Someone was playing a recording of a distress call on a loop over an open channel, and they were broadcasting it specifically on the frequency that only rangers and local emergency services monitor. A smart ranger would have called it in and waited for backup, but the storm had knocked out the repeater towers to the south, meaning I couldn't reach dispatch from this deep in the valley. I was on my own, and if there really was someone hurt out there, or if this was some kind of sick prank, I was the only one close enough to do anything about it. I threw the truck into drive and began the slow, treacherous crawl down the muddy logging road toward the old mine entrance. The headlights cut through the driving rain, illuminating the twisted shapes of the pine trees that lined the road like silent sentinels watching me pass. Every 30 seconds, like clockwork, that voice came over the radio, begging for help with a broken leg. As I got closer to the mine, the feeling of dread grew heavier, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. The road narrowed until the branches were scraping against the sides of the truck with screeching sounds that set my teeth on edge. I finally reached the clearing where the mine entrance was located, a gaping black hole in the side of the mountain that had been boarded up decades ago. I killed the headlights and the engine, plunging the world into total darkness, and cracked my window just an inch to listen to the night. The rain was slowing down, turning into a steady drizzle, and in the silence of the woods, I heard it. The voice wasn't coming from the mine. It was coming from the woods to my right, about 50 yards into the tree line. But it wasn't coming from a radio anymore. It sounded like it was being played through a speaker. "Please, someone. Leg is broken." I unholstered my service weapon and grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight from the passenger seat, stepping out of the truck as quietly as I could. The mud sucked at my boots as I moved toward the tree line, using the thunder to mask the sound of my footsteps. I didn't turn my flashlight on yet because I didn't want to give away my position to whoever was out there playing games. I crept through the wet brush, the water soaking through my uniform instantly, my eyes adjusting to the gloom until I saw a faint, bluish glow coming from behind a cluster of boulders. I moved closer, my finger resting on the trigger guard of my pistol, my breath coming in shallow, controlled bursts. When I peered around the boulder, my blood ran cold. There was a small, battery-powered Bluetooth speaker sitting on a stump, wrapped in plastic to protect it from the rain. Next to it was a cheap walkie-talkie with the talk button taped down, transmitting the sound from the speaker onto the ranger frequency. It was a lure. It was a trap designed to bring a ranger specifically to this spot, to this exact boulder. I realized my mistake a fraction of a second too late. From the darkness directly behind me, I heard the distinctive metallic click of a hammer being pulled back on a revolver. "Don't turn around," a voice rasped, low and rough like gravel grinding together. "Just drop the gun and the light and get on your knees." I froze, the rain dripping off the brim of my hat, my mind racing through the scenarios. This wasn't a prank. This was an ambush. I slowly opened my hands, letting the flashlight drop into the mud with a wet thud, but I hesitated with the gun. "I said drop it," the voice growled, and I felt the cold steel of a gun barrel press against the back of my neck, right at the base of my skull. I dropped the gun. It landed in the mud next to the flashlight, and I slowly lowered myself to my knees, raising my hands in the air. "I'm a federal ranger," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You kill me, and every cop in the state will be combing these woods by sunrise." "That's the plan," the man said, and I heard him take a step back. "We need them looking here. We need them looking for you so they aren't looking at what we're moving across the border 10 miles east of here." It hit me then. I wasn't the target, I was the distraction. They were going to execute a ranger and leave the body to be found, creating a massive crime scene investigation that would pull all resources to this sector while they smuggled something massive through the unchecked eastern corridor. "Turn off the speaker," the man commanded someone else in the darkness. A second figure stepped out from the trees in front of me, dressed in dark camouflage and wearing night vision goggles. He walked over to the stump and switched off the recording. The silence that followed was deafening. "Do it," the second man said. I knew I had less than a second to act. The man behind me had stepped back to aim, which meant the gun wasn't touching my neck anymore. I was on my knees in the mud, which gave me a low center of gravity. I didn't try to stand up. Instead, I threw my body backward with all the force I could muster, driving my shoulder into the knees of the man behind me. He grunted in surprise and his gun went off, the shot cracking through the air like a whip, but the bullet went wild, tearing through the canopy above us. He crumbled under my weight, and we both went down into the slick, freezing mud. I scrambled, clawing at his face, feeling the rough stubble and the panic in his movements. He was trying to bring the gun back around, but I jammed my thumb deep into his eye socket, feeling it squish, and he screamed, dropping the weapon. "He's loose!" the man in front of me yelled, and I saw the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, blinding me. I rolled to the side, grabbing my own flashlight from the mud, and swung it blindly in a wide arc. The heavy metal casing connected with something hard, a shin bone, and the second man howled in pain. I didn't wait to see what happened. I scrambled to my feet, slipping and sliding, and bolted into the deep woods. "Kill him!" the first man screamed from the ground. "Don't let him get to the radio." I ran like I had never ran before, ignoring the branches whipping my face and tearing my skin. I couldn't go back to the truck because they would be expecting that, and they would be waiting with guns drawn. I had to go deeper into the dark, into the terrain that I knew better than they did. I could hear them crashing through the brush behind me, their heavy boots thudding against the earth. They were fast, but they were clumsy, making too much noise. I slid down a steep embankment, tumbling through wet leaves and mud until I hit the bottom of a ravine. I pressed myself flat against the muddy bank, covering my flashlight with my body to hide any light leak. Above me, on the ridge, I saw the sweep of their flashlight beams cutting through the rain. "I don't see him," one of them panted. "He can't have gone far," the other replied. "Sweep the grid. If he gets to a repeater tower and manually keys it, we're dead." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they could hear it. They were right. The repeater tower. There was a manual override box at the base of the tower on the summit, about 2 miles uphill. If I could get there, I could hardline a distress signal that would bypass the storm interference. I waited until their lights moved further west. Then I began to climb. The next hour was a blur of freezing rain and exhaustion. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. Every snapping twig sounded like a trigger being pulled. I moved silently, using the noise of the wind to mask my ascent. My uniform was heavy with water and mud, dragging me down, but the fear kept me moving. I finally saw the red blinking light of the repeater tower through the trees. It looked like salvation. I sprinted the last 100 yards, my lungs burning, and reached the metal box at the base of the tower. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. Snap! A twig broke directly behind me. I spun around, my back against the cold metal of the tower. Standing 10 feet away was the man in the night vision goggles. He wasn't rushing anymore. He was just standing there, raising a rifle to his shoulder. "End of the line, Ranger," he whispered. I had nowhere to go. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the flash, waiting for the end. But instead of a gunshot, a blinding white light flooded the clearing from above. The roar of a rotor washed over us, shaking the ground. "State Police!" A voice boomed over a loudspeaker from the sky. "Drop the weapon." A helicopter spotlight pinned the man to the ground. He looked up, blinded, and dropped the rifle, raising his hands in defeat. I slid down the side of the electrical box, my legs finally giving out. It turned out that my initial radio check, the one before I went into the woods, had been picked up by a trucker on the highway 10 miles away who had a signal booster. He had heard the weird loop and called 911. The police arrested the 2 men and found 3 more of them waiting at the decoy site down the road. They were part of a massive human trafficking ring, and they had planned to kill me just to create a diversion. I still work as a ranger, but things have changed for me. Now, when I'm on the night shift and I hear the radio crackle with static, I don't answer it right away. I listen, I wait, and I make sure that whatever is calling for help out there in the dark is actually in trouble or it's a trap. There is a specific kind of silence that happens in the deep woods when you are 20 miles from the nearest paved road, a silence so heavy that it feels like it is pressing against your eardrums, making you hyper-aware of the sound of your own breathing and the creaking of the floorboards beneath your boots. I have been a ranger for the Department of Fish and Wildlife for over 10 years, living alone in a seasonal patrol cabin deep in the Appalachian foothills, and I always told myself that I loved the solitude, but that changed last November when I checked the memory card from Trail Camera 04. My name is Mark, and my job is fairly technical. I track the migration patterns of black bears and white-tailed deer, which involves hiking miles into the brush to swap out SD cards from motion-activated cameras strapped to trees. It's usually dull work, consisting of sifting through thousands of photos of wind-blown branches, squirrels, and the occasional confused raccoon. But on this particular Tuesday, the contents of that little plastic memory card made my blood run cold. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a chipped wooden slab that has been in this cabin since the 1970s, with a mug of black coffee steaming in the cold air, and I inserted the card into my laptop to review the week's footage. The first few hundred images were standard. A doe grazing at dawn, a fox darting through the underbrush, a blurry shot of a coyote's tail. I was clicking through them rapidly, my mind already drifting to the list of chores I had to do before winter set in, when my finger froze on the arrow key. Image number 4021 wasn't a deer, and it wasn't a bear. It was a boot. It was a close-up, high-definition shot of a muddy, tattered work boot stepping directly into the frame, less than 6 inches from the lens. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen, because Trail Camera 04 was located in a restricted drainage ditch about 2 miles north of my cabin, an area that no hikers ever go to because it's a steep, treacherous ravine filled with poison ivy. I clicked to the next image. The camera angle had changed. Whoever was wearing the boot had unstrapped the camera from the tree. The photo was blurry, showing a dizzying spin of trees and sky as the camera was carried through the woods. I felt a spike of irritation, assuming it was a poacher or some teenagers messing with government property, which is a federal offense that carries a hefty fine. I clicked again, expecting to see the camera thrown in the mud or smashed. Instead, the next image stopped my heart. The timestamp was from last night at 3:14 a.m. The image was grainy and black and white because the infrared night vision had kicked in. It showed a wooden structure, viewed from a low angle, looking up through tall grass. It was my cabin. The camera had been moved from the ravine, carried 2 miles through the dense forest in the pitch black, and set up in the tall grass directly facing my kitchen window. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. I walked to the window, the same window in the photo, and peered out into the gray afternoon light. The grass was tall and yellow, swaying in the wind, but I couldn't see the camera from here. I went back to the laptop, my hands starting to sweat. I needed to see what else was on that card. I clicked Next. Image 4024. 3:15 a.m. The figure was moving closer to the cabin. I could only see a silhouette, a dark shape blocking out the infrared light, but I could tell it was a man. He was large, broad-shouldered, and wearing layers of loose, hanging clothing. Image 4025. 3:18 a.m. He was at the window. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold sensation wash over my skin, because in this photo, the camera was pressed right up against the glass. The infrared flash had illuminated the interior of my cabin. I could see my kitchen table. I could see the jacket I had left draped over the chair. And I could see the hallway leading to my bedroom. I clicked Next. Image 4026. 3:20 a.m. The camera was inside the cabin. I stopped breathing. The lock on the back door was finicky, a simple latch that could be shimmed with a credit card if you knew how, but I always locked it. The photo showed the view from my hallway, looking toward the open door of my bedroom. In the center of the frame, lying in the bed, was me. I was asleep, lying on my side, completely unaware that a stranger was standing 5 feet away from me, holding a stolen trail camera, taking pictures of me while I dreamed. The timestamp indicated he had stood there for over 10 minutes. I scrolled frantically through the rest of the images. There were dozens of them. Photos of my boots by the door. Photos of my pantry shelves. Photos of me sleeping from different angles. The final photo was taken at 4 a.m. It was a selfie. The man was holding the camera at arm's length, the infrared light illuminating his face in a ghostly, overexposed white. He had a thick, matted beard that covered most of his features, and his eyes were wide and wild, staring directly into the lens. He wasn't smiling. His expression was completely blank, devoid of any emotion, which was somehow infinitely worse than if he had been snarling. Behind him, in the background, was the underside of a floorboard. He hadn't left. I realized with a sickening jolt where the last photo was taken. My cabin is a pier and beam structure, raised about 3 feet off the ground on cinder blocks to keep it away from the snow and the damp earth. The space underneath is skirted with wooden lattice, but there is a small access door around the back for plumbing repairs. The background of the selfie wasn't the woods. It was the crawl space directly beneath my feet. I slowly took my hand off the mouse, my eyes darting to the floor. The wooden planks were old pine, with small gaps between them where the dust settled. If he was down there, and if he was listening, he would have heard me walking around. He would know I was awake. I needed my weapon. My service pistol was in the gun safe in the bedroom, which was on the other side of the cabin. I had to walk down that hallway, the same hallway he had photographed, to get to it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my footsteps light, and began to move. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a scream. Kriawak. I paused, listening. From directly beneath me, I heard a soft, scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. He was tracking me. He was mirroring my movements from underneath the floor. I lunged for the bedroom, abandoning stealth for speed, and slammed the door behind me, locking it. I spun the dial on the safe, my fingers fumbling with the combination. Left to 24, right to 10, left to 5. The door clicked open and I grabbed the Sig Sauer P320, racking the slide to chamber around. I felt a momentary surge of confidence now that I had the gun in my hand. I was the ranger here. I was the authority. "Come out," I yelled, aiming the gun at the floor. "I know you're down there, federal agent. Come out with your hands visible." Silence. Then, a low, guttural laugh drifted up through the heating vent in the corner of the room. It was a wet, phlegmy sound that made my skin crawl. "You have nice food," the voice rasped, sounding like it was coming from inside the room with me. "Better than the squirrels." I realized then that small things had been going missing for weeks. Cans of tuna, a box of crackers, a spare blanket. I had blamed it on my own forgetfulness, thinking I had eaten them or misplaced them. But he had been here the whole time. He had been living under my floorboards, coming up while I was on patrol, eating my food, using my shelter. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, backing away from the vent. "They are on their way. Radio is broken." The voice whispered. I looked at the bedside table where I kept my handheld radio. The antenna had been snapped clean off. I hadn't noticed it because I had just come off shift and hadn't tried to check in yet. "Telephone line is cut too," he added, his voice sounding amused. "I cut it last night, before the pictures. I was trapped. The nearest station was an hour away by car, and if I tried to run for my truck, I would have to go outside. The crawlspace access door was right next to where I parked the truck. He could grab my ankle before I even got the key in the door. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, aiming the gun at the door, then the floor, then the window, not knowing where he would come from. "I want you to sleep," the voice said. "Go back to sleep, Mark. You look so peaceful when you sleep." He knew my name. Suddenly, the floorboards in the corner of the room, right under the heavy oak dresser, began to lift. I hadn't realized there was a trapdoor there. It must have been an old maintenance hatch from when the cabin was built, covered up by the rug and the furniture for decades. The dresser tipped forward with a heavy crash, sliding aside as the boards were pushed up with incredible strength. A dirty hand, caked in mud and dried blood, gripped the edge of the hole. I fired. I didn't wait to see his face. I squeezed the trigger, the gunshot exploding in the small room, deafening me. The bullet splintered the wood right next to the hand. The hand didn't pull back. Instead, the figure surged upward with the speed of a feral animal. He was huge, smelling of rot and wet earth, his hair a tangled mess of leaves and filth. He roared, a sound of pure rage, and lunged at me before I could line up a second shot. We crashed into the wall, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The gun flew from my hand and slid under the bed. He was on top of me instantly, his hands clamping around my throat. His grip was like iron, his thumbs digging into my windpipe, cutting off my air. I clawed at his face, my fingers raking through his beard, but he didn't seem to feel pain. He was smiling, revealing rows of black, rotting teeth. "Sleep," he hissed, spittle flying into my face. "Just sleep." My vision started to spot with black dots. I flailed my legs, kicking out blindly. My boot connected with something hard, the radiator pipes running along the baseboard. I hooked my foot behind the hot water pipe and pushed off with everything I had left, bucking my hips. It threw his balance off just enough. He tipped to the side, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. I gasped for air and rolled, scrambling on my hands and knees toward the bed, reaching for the gun. He grabbed my ankle and yanked me back. My fingernails dug into the wood floor, leaving grooves, but he was too strong. He dragged me back toward the open hole in the floor. He was trying to pull me down into the crawl space. I kicked backward with my free leg, my heavy ranger boot connecting solidly with his nose. I heard a sickening crunch, and he let go with a howl of pain. I dove for the gun, gripping the cold steel, and rolled onto my back. He was already coming at me again, blood pouring from his shattered nose, his eyes filled with murder. I fired twice, center mass. The impact stopped him cold. He stumbled back, looking down at his chest with a confused expression, then collapsed backward, falling halfway into the hole he had crawled out of. I didn't get up immediately. I lay there, gasping for air, the gun still pointed at his motionless body, waiting for him to move. The silence of the woods rushed back in, ringing in my ears. It took me 10 minutes to build the courage to check him. He was dead. When the state troopers finally arrived, after I had to hike 5 miles to a ridge where I could get a cell signal, they did a full sweep of the crawl space. What they found down there still gives me nightmares. He had been living under my cabin for at least 2 months. He had a nest made of my stolen blankets, insulation ripped from the floor, and piles of animal bones. But the worst part wasn't the nest. Taped to the underside of the floorboards, directly beneath my bed, were hundreds of Polaroid photos. They weren't of me. They were of the ranger who lived here before me and the one before him. He hadn't just been watching me. He had been watching all of us, for years, documenting our lives from the darkness beneath our feet. The police identified him as a man who had gone missing from a psychiatric ward in 1998, a man who had supposedly died in the wilderness decades ago. I requested a transfer the next day. I work in a desert park now, out in Utah, where the ground is flat and hard and there are no crawl spaces, and the visibility is 10 miles in every direction. But even now, when I'm lying in bed at night, if the floorboards settle or the house creaks, I find myself holding my breath. There is a golden rule in law enforcement that says there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. And that rule applies tenfold when you are a ranger working the night shift on a gravel fire road that doesn't lead to anything but cliffs and dead ends. I have pulled over drunk teenagers and confused tourists more times than I can count. But the silver minivan I found idling at mile 8 last Tuesday gave me a feeling of dread that I felt all the way down in my boots before I even put the truck in park. My name is Jason, and I patrol a sector of the forest that is popular with families because of the lakes and the campgrounds. But mile 8 is a restricted logging road that is clearly marked with no entry signs. It was 2:15 a.m., completely pitch black, and the air was thick with the kind of heavy mist that dampens sound and makes your flashlight beam terminate in a wall of white fog after 10 feet. The vehicle was a late-model silver Honda Odyssey, and as I pulled up behind it and hit my takedown lights, the bright white LEDs flooded the interior of the van. The reason my stomach was turning over was that we had been hearing radio broadcasts all day about a missing family of 4, the Petersons, who had failed to check out of their cabin that morning, and they were driving a silver Honda Odyssey. I called in the plate number to dispatch, my voice lowered to a whisper. "Dispatch, this is Unit 2 Bravo. I have a vehicle matching the Peterson description at mile marker 8. Requesting immediate backup." Copy 2 Bravo, backup is 40 minutes out. Proceed with caution. 40 minutes might as well have been 40 years. I was alone. I stepped out of the truck, unsnapping the retention strap on my holster, and walked toward the driver's side, keeping my flashlight beam aimed at the side mirror so I could blind the driver if he tried to look back at me. The van was still running, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the cold night air, and I could see that the windows were tinted dark. I reached the driver's window and tapped on the glass with the butt of my flashlight. The window rolled down slowly. The man sitting in the driver's seat was smiling. It was a wide, friendly, easygoing smile that didn't match the situation at all. He was wearing a red and black flannel shirt that looked expensive, the kind you buy at a high-end outdoor store, but the sleeves were too long for his arms, rolled up in messy, thick cuffs at his wrists. "Good evening, officer," he said, his voice calm and melodic. "Is there a problem?" I shone my light into his face. He had a scruffy beard and looked tired, but his eyes were alert. "Sir, this is a restricted road. You're miles away from the public campsites. Can I see your identification?" "Of course," he said, reaching for the glove box. As he leaned over, my flashlight beam swept across the passenger seat. There was a woman's purse sitting there, dumped open, its contents spilled across the floor mat. Lipstick, a wallet, keys, and a shattered pair of sunglasses. It looked violent, not accidental. He handed me a driver's license. The name on the card read Robert Peterson. I looked at the photo on the license, then I looked at the man in the seat. They both had brown hair and beards, but the man in the photo had blue eyes. The man smiling at me had eyes that were dark brown, almost black. He wasn't Robert Peterson. He was wearing Robert Peterson's shirt. "Mr. Peterson," I said, keeping my voice level, shifting my stance so my hand was hovering over my gun. "Who is in the back with you tonight?" "Just the kids," he said, gesturing vaguely with his thumb over his shoulder. "They're all sleeping. We got a little turned around looking for a late-night spot to stargaze." I shone my light into the back of the van. The seats had been folded down flat. The entire rear cargo area was covered with a heavy blue plastic tarp, the kind used for construction. There were lumpy shapes underneath it. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle," I commanded, taking a step back. "I really don't want to wake them," he said, his smile never faltering, but his hand began to drift down toward the space between the seat and the center console. "Hands where I can see them," I shouted, drawing my weapon and pointing it at his chest. "Step out of the vehicle now." The man stopped moving. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of cold, calculating rage. He stared at me for a long second, weighing his odds, looking at the gun and then looking at the dark road ahead of him. Then the tarp in the back moved. It wasn't a subtle shift. A small hand pressed up against the blue plastic, desperate and frantic. A muffled sound came from beneath it, the sound of someone trying to scream through a gag. "Help!" A child's voice squeaked, barely audible. The driver's eyes snapped to the rearview mirror, and in that split second of distraction, I lunged. I didn't wait for him to grab whatever weapon he was hiding. I reached through the open window, grabbed him by the collar of the stolen flannel shirt, and yanked him halfway out of the window. He snarled, thrashing and clawing at my face, but I jammed the barrel of my pistol into his cheek. "Move and you die," I screamed. He froze. I dragged him out of the car, threw him onto the gravel, and cuffed him before he could catch his breath. I threw him into the back of my patrol unit and ran back to the van, ripping the back door open. I pulled back the tarp. Robert Peterson, his wife, and their 2 young daughters were all there, bound with zip ties and duct tape. They were terrified, bruised, and dehydrated, but they were alive. The father, Robert, was shivering in his undershirt because the man I had just arrested was wearing his clothes. It turned out the man was a drifter who had carjacked them at a gas station 6 hours prior. He had driven them out to the middle of nowhere, planning to finish what he started, and had only paused at mile 8 to figure out how to dispose of the car. If I hadn't noticed the eye color, or if I had believed his smile for even a second longer, I would have driven away, and that family would have never been seen again. Now, whenever I pull someone over at night, I don't look at the license first. I look at the back seat.